I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. Welcome back to the show, Hilliard.
Nice to be back.
I see on business television that Canadian housing prices actually went up in July and that housing starts were much higher than expected. What's happening with the Canadian real estate market?
Well, Vancouver is a special case, of course, but across Canada, the general situation is housing starts are continuing to be strong. Prices are starting to soften in many areas, but Toronto and Vancouver continue to Toronto continues to show strong gains, and Vancouver started to slump a bit, and nobody knows exactly how far it's going to go, or whether it's just a small correction, or whether it's the start of the big crash that some of us are expecting. So there is one reason why the numbers that'll come out very soon for August might be exaggerated, and this showed up in July as well. The real estate board of Vancouver does an odd thing. So when somebody contracts to buy a house in, say, May or June, and then the closing date is in July or August, and then for whatever reason they decide to cancel, they subtract that sale from the July or August numbers, but they don't go back and correct June. So it looks like a huge drop from June to July, or July to August, when people cancel, but it's actually not. It's not correctly captured. It exaggerates the impact. And the reason they might be canceling, of course, is the 15% tax on foreign buyers. So we don't know how big the foreign buyer bid is, but in the higher end housing, the $2 million and up, it's probably quite important, and West Van and places like that. So and those are the numbers that skew the average. So the high-priced homes are the things that drag the average up, and the high-priced homes are probably where the cancellations are becoming, because on a $2 million house, 15% tax is $300,000. I think most people would kind of maybe pause and take a breath before moving ahead on that. So we won't really know for a few months how big that impact is. But the numbers that have come out so far show a very significant drop in sales and also in prices. So, of course, the real estate industry is very creative, and they've come up with a new thing called the benchmark price. The benchmark price eliminates some of these distortions that might be put in by the 15% tax.
Right. But, of course, when you keep changing the way that statistics are presented and gathered, they start to mean or stop meaning much, because you don't know what the hell it represents.
Well, yeah, I mean, the seasonal adjustments, I saw a report just this morning saying that August is traditionally one of the slowest months, but my understanding was August actually was a pretty busy month, because people, if they're moving to an area where their kids might start school, they'd want to be in place for the September long weekend, so the kids could start fresh at a new school. No kid wants to come in 2 weeks late at the start of school, because it's not fun at all. And so I thought that people moving in August was a pretty big Canadian phenomenon, but so who knows? But I look at the U.S. Situation compared to Canada, because the U.S. had a bubble and then it had a crash, and one of the narratives that's coming out of this new housing strategy that the government of Canada is working on is there's a lack of supply, and especially in Vancouver, because they talk about being sandwiched between the mountains and the ocean, and there's no room for land and that sort of thing. But really, when I look at the actual housing starts in Vancouver and Toronto, they're very close to record high levels, and they have been for many, many months, and actually several years. So when I look at the U.S. housing starts, they peaked at around the 2.4 million annual rate. So if you divide by 10 for the population difference, it's almost 10 to 1 roughly. That would be 240,000 in Canada, which is about slightly higher than the current level that we've been at. We've been around between 190 and 200,000 for many months, in fact, for 3 or 4 years now. But then the U.S. dropped down in the crash. The U.S. dropped down to 400,000, and now it's recovered to 1.2 million, which would be 120,000. So the U.S. is ticking along between 400,000 and 1.2 million for the last 7 or 8 years, and we're currently at the equivalent of about 200,000. So we're 50% higher, or even as much as triple what the U.S. was at the very bottom in the peak. So the idea that we're not building enough is just, it's possible that it's correct, but it seems extremely unlikely that it would be correct given how much we're building, and compared to other areas like the United States. For instance, in Canada in 2014, we built 189,000 units. In Canada in 2015, we built 195,000 units. And the annualized rate for the first 6 months of the year goes from a low of 173 in January, because it's hard to build in January in Canada, 217, 202, and I would say, eyeballing it looks like it's averaging around 200. So we're at record high levels of construction. So, people are going to read in the next little while about this shortage of supply, but it just doesn't show up in the actual numbers. There's a generous amount of housing being built, especially in Toronto and Vancouver. Toronto and Vancouver is at record high levels. So it just doesn't make sense. But there is one possibility as to why there still might be a problem, and that is maybe they're building the wrong kind of housing, right? Maybe they're not building what people actually can afford or what people actually want.
Well, for example, here too in Vancouver, all those places they bought for 1.1 million, they ripped down that old house and they're building a new one. So that would be registered, of course, as a new housing start, but it's just replacing the one that was there. It's not creating more.
Yeah, exactly. It's there's no new house, but it would be listed as a new house start. Now, one of the funny things that's happening in Edmonton is they changed the zoning regulations, and perhaps they've done this in Vancouver too, where you can build multiple houses on what used to be a single-family home lot, and the spec builders in the older neighborhoods in the center of the city are going crazy with that. So they're buying a lot. They're buying a house, but they demolish that. So they're just buying the lot, really, for $500,000-$600,000, and still the prices are still pretty high. They haven't corrected that much yet, and then they're building 2 or 3 homes on that same lot. So some of them are actually managing to squeeze 3 homes onto what was a bigger lot, I guess. And they're trying to sell those skinny houses, people are calling them, for $750,000, $850,000, $900,000. Even some of them are $1 million in some of the higher end neighborhoods. So, as far as I can tell, people are not jumping at the opportunity to spend that much money on a 1,500 square foot house that is spread across 3 or 4 levels. The problem with the skinny houses, of course, is the stairs, and also inevitably there's a lot of wasted space in a house like that, because the way the construction works and that sort of thing, there's going to be rooms on the 3rd level or the 2nd level that just aren't optimal. So it remains to be seen whether that can happen. But that would show up as 3 starts, 2 or 3 starts on one lot. So that would actually increase the numbers. But I don't think there's any question that Canada and Canadians have been investing a very large amount of their money into housing in the last 10 or 15 years, and it's unlikely that there's any real shortage of housing. It's just perhaps a function of speculators buying the houses, and I like in Edmonton, and I'm sure in Vancouver, people buy condos and they just sit empty. So that's that's demand that's not being really used to satisfy the housing issue. Now that they might decide. In fact, there's a proposal, I think, in BC to tax people that do that, and that would force people to either rent those places out or sell them to somebody who actually wants to live there.
Also in Vancouver, one of the pressures on rental housing is Airbnb. It's now offering cash bonuses to people who sign up because Vancouver is such a popular tourist destination all year round.
Yeah, I think, all year round, I don't know about that. But
oh, yeah.
Is that right? Yeah, for sure. Maybe they're going there to look for real estate to buy, though. Who knows? So the National Housing Strategy that's coming out it's coming out fairly soon, I think. I think they gave themselves till November or something to get it together, although I'm not sure if that's the exact date. But inevitably, when the government gets involved, they're going to give incentives to do something because they have to appear to be doing something, and they want to help the situation. And but they really don't want to tackle the demand side. Tackling the demand side would mean, saying, people just can't borrow $1 million to buy a house. That's just not going to be allowed. We'll change the rules so that the maximum you can borrow is some much smaller number, which would have an immediate effect, but it would also create some real problems in the lending market. So they're more likely to work on the supply side, and they're more likely to talk about affordable housing. So inevitably, it'd be very difficult for the government to give incentives that allow builders to sell houses at affordable rate, especially in Vancouver and Toronto. So what will happen is, most likely, is they'll give incentives for builders to build rental accommodations. And that'll be very interesting because in the 2 years since I've been talking to people about this, it seems pretty universal that people are at least up until recently, people were pretty much dead set against renting, and they felt that owning was the only way to go because they wanted to build equity. So if people feel that renting is kind of somehow a loser's game or something that only people that are failing in life do, then it's going to be difficult to find people that want to move into that rental stuff. But at this point, if prices start to correct, I think people will find that renting is much more financially attractive. People could save a tremendous amount of money over being an owner if they could get their head around the idea of renting instead of owning. And especially in Edmonton and Calgary, and I don't think it's hit Vancouver yet, but the bargains that are starting to show up in the rental market are outstanding. People can get very, very... I've talked to many people, as I think I've mentioned to you before, Jim. I've talked to many people that are considering renting, and some renters that have actually been approached by their landlord and had offers of lowering the rent just because the landlord doesn't want to lose a tenant. There's a lot of rental places in Alberta that are desperate to find tenants because people have moved back to Newfoundland or back to BC or wherever, and they can't replace the tenant that's departed. So a lot of these landlords, they've borrowed a lot of money to buy these apartments, and they need a tenant in there in order to make it work. They can't last very long with no rent coming in. So that's going to be the new bargain, and I suspect that'll be the bargain first that shows up with the government incentives that are going to come in, plus these desperate landlords. That'll be the bargain that shows up first. Then a little later on, the house prices will correct to more reasonable levels, but that'll take longer.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth right after the break.
Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth. You said the rental market in Edmonton, lots of vacancies, people are lowering prices, but house prices haven't come down that much. People still aren't desperate despite the massive job loss in the oil patch?
No, it's absolutely shocking. In fact, these, as I mentioned earlier about the people buying these lots and then tearing down the house and building these skinny houses, there's bidding wars. Like, these are teardowns. These are not nice houses. These are teardowns, but they're in older neighborhoods closer into the center of the city, and so the neighborhood is attractive, but the house is a disaster. So apparently, there's bidding wars. I talked to one fellow, a client of mine that wanted to do exactly that, but he wanted to build a single-family home for his family. And he bid on one of these things, and he said there was 3 people bidding on it, and they were bidding above list price. So, as long as that happens, it's going to be hard for the house prices to come down. But eventually, people will obviously realize that Alberta's in a recession that is, according to TD Economics, the report that came out in July, the Alberta recession is twice as bad as the average recession, and you'd have to go all the way back to the 1980s to see a recession as bad as this. They're estimating a 6.5% total drop in GDP over 2 years, last year and this year, from peak to trough, which is much worse than any of the recessions we've had for probably 4 decades now. So, but the interesting thing about that is people still seem to have some money. So, people are, for instance, one fellow told me recently that he owns a number of these fast food franchises, and the business brokers that buy and sell those things have been calling him saying, do you want to sell? Do you want to sell? Because I've got all these buyers lined up. So these are people that have probably been laid off from their job with an oil company, and they have some money, or maybe they got a severance package or something, and they're looking to buy a job in the form of owning a franchise. And so it's a very odd situation right now. But the reality is that, and then there's one more thing I should add is there's a lot of optimism that it's going to come back, that the jobs are going to come back, although that optimism is starting to fade now that this thing now is 2 years old. It was around the summer of 2014 that it started, when the oil price started to slip. So, but all of that aside, I think eventually the reality will settle in that Alberta's going to go through a very difficult time. And the government results that came out a couple of months ago showed that the revenues are way down for oil and gas royalty revenues, and tax revenues are coming down. There is one bank in Alberta, the Canadian Western Bank, based in Edmonton, has a lot of business in BC as well, and their latest results came out last week, and they did pretty well, but there was a pretty big increase in non-performing loans. If you look at consumer proposals and bankruptcy, consumer bankruptcies, Alberta is soaring through the roof, and that takes people quite a while to get around to doing that. It's quite a drastic step. There's a lot of shame involved and a lot of hard feelings, and so that's something that usually continues to increase long after the recession is over. So the forecasts are for the recession to end in 2017, sometime early to mid 2017, and then a slow recovery depending on the price of oil and that sort of thing. But certainly, what we've seen so far in the housing market in Alberta, I think, is just pretty minor compared to what we're likely to see before it's over.
Well, when you said Albertans now are looking to buy fast food franchises and so on, I think Albertans are entrepreneurs by nature and are very flexible when it comes to finding new ways to make money. I know with my family reunion back in July, most of those people had been employed by oil, and yet they had found new sources of revenue. They spun off businesses, found little niches that needed to be serviced. And so none of them had actually, had lost work because of it. And perhaps that's what's happening, is now that oil's been taken away, they're looking at other things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the resilience and the entrepreneurial spirit and the optimism is very, very much stronger in Alberta, I think, than anywhere else. And people move to Alberta because of that. Like they'll leave New Brunswick, not to criticize New Brunswick, but the attitude in New Brunswick is much more laid back than it is in Alberta. And so they move here in order to get in on the activity and the pace and all that. But the reality is that, even if you buy a fast food franchise, like a pizza franchise or a Tim Hortons or something like that, eventually, if the people don't have the jobs, and and unemployment's actually now in Alberta has passed the peak in 2008-2009 recession. They're not going to be going to Tim Hortons. So at least I think, I can't believe it. I drive by Tim Hortons and you see all these pickup trucks lined up waiting to buy a double-double or a triple-triple. But, so they still have money, but probably not a great, business venture if people are unemployed. I think they'll figure out that they can probably make their own coffee at home much cheaper.
And folks, here we do have some breaking news here on the program. Hilliard, you're just saying the latest housing numbers for Canada have come out, and Vancouver is building more homes just about than the rest of the country put together?
Well, no, it's not quite that exaggerated, but Vancouver's building 20% year to date, 20% roughly of all the new homes, including multifamily and single-family homes. 39% increase year over year in Vancouver, and 20% of the total with less than 10% of the population. So Vancouver is only slightly behind the Toronto area, which is 2 or 3 times bigger than the Vancouver area. So it's an amazing story. So everywhere else in Canada, the housing starts are starting to really slow down quite dramatically, and Vancouver continues to surge ahead. So, in BC, for example, Vancouver's building 19,000 units, and the total for BC is 26,000. So practically all of the new units that are being built are in the greater Vancouver area. And it appears that there's no shortage of land to build on in Vancouver, although it is possible that they're tearing down one house to build, as you were mentioning a minute ago, they're tearing down one house to build a new one. But it's going to be very interesting to see if that's called the supply side response. If prices go up, economics says that the provider of the commodity should build more, and that seems to be what they're doing. So there's going to be lots of availability of new homes for sale or new condos for sale in Vancouver if these numbers continue like this.
Well, does a developer have to sell for $1.4 million? Could they sell for $900,000 and still make a profit?
I don't know. That's a good question. It's a really hard to know. It depends on the cost of land and everything else. So it is possible that they're building these things that nobody wants, and that would be a disaster. If they're building high-end condos and the foreign investor disappears because of the 15% tax, there could be a real shakeout caused by excess supply. And that's my research shows that Canada, not just Vancouver, but Canada as a total, has been building houses at a much faster rate than say the United States, adjusted for population, for many, many years. So at some point we may find that we've built too many houses, but you wouldn't read that in the popular media right now.
Well, Vancouver does have a lot of people who move here every year, anywhere from 26,000 to over 40,000 a year. They have to live somewhere.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Hilliard, once again, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Okay, thanks.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth. Check out his book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.